Hey pirate fans around the world, this is San Jose Galleon, the Holy Grail and the multi-billion-dollar fight. A sunken warship, a secret location, and a courtroom battle worth more than its gold. The San Jose Galleon is called the Holy Grail of shipwrecks because of its massive cargo, the dramatic way it went down, and a modern legal fight measured in billions. This program offers a clear evidence-first tour: what the ship carried, how it sank, who claims it, which laws decide its fate, the technology peering into the deep, and how museums would treat any recovery. It opens with a rapid snapshot of the money, the claimants, and why governments keep exact coordinates secret, because here location means power and protection. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really enjoy and want to fall asleep with pirate stories whenever you want. The nickname Holy Grail holds three ideas at once. First, scale. The cargo was vast for its time, a moving bank that linked mines, mints, merchants, and monarchs. Second, condition. The wreck rests at a depth that preserves and conceals, making it hard to reach but rich in context for those who do. Third, controversy. It stands in a beam of legal and diplomatic light, where states, salvors, insurers, and historians all make claims. The cash value matters, but cultural value matters more. The pieces are evidence, and together they can retell a chapter of global history. In maritime archaeology, Holy Grail does not mean fantasy. It means a rare site with deep documentation and stubborn disputes. Let's take it step by step with a 60-second snapshot. Money. Estimates soar and shrink depending on what is counted: registered silver, unregistered gold, emeralds, and private shipments, then converted into modern prices. Claims. The coastal state points to heritage law. The flag state of the warship points to sovereign immunity. Private discoverers point to effort. Old insurers' heirs sometimes point to paid policies. Secrecy. Exact coordinates stay sealed because once they leak, looters organize faster than laboratories do. Officials speak in safe circles, depth ranges, distances from landmarks, not in numbers. A pirate GPS can swallow. The road to the bottom begins off Cartagena de Indias in 1708. Spain's empire moved wealth in convoys, escorted fleets designed to make ambushes costly. The San Jose sailed with companions, guarded by guns and guided by pilots who read wind and tide like familiar handwriting. Opponents watched those lanes with patience. When the squadrons finally touched, the exchange was short and brutal. A blast, perhaps the powder magazine, perhaps fire finding its way toward the ship's heart. Witnesses wrote of flames, of a shape leaning and vanishing, of water closing over noise. The treasure sank, the paper lived, because manifests, letters, and reports survived in archives. The outline of the ship's last day is firm. What was aboard divides neatly into three baskets. First, registered cargo. Bars and coins recorded with official marks, tallied for tax and transport. Second, private ventures. Officers' consignments and merchants' side deals, tucked into legal space when it appeared and illegal corners when it did not. Third, rumor. Numbers stretched by retellers until they fit headlines better than history. A calm mind keeps the baskets apart. Registered totals form the floor. Private editions likely lifted that floor, sometimes by a lot, but not to infinity. Rumor sits outside the room, knocking on the door. It may be invited in for curiosity, not for math. The path from legend to coordinates took patience and cautious voices. Discovery announcements came in careful government phrases and in excited private statements. Sonar mosaics, ROV stills, and video frames traveled around the world. More than one discovery appeared, because identity is not a switch. It is a case built on matches, cannon types to foundry lists, hull features to shipbuilding plans, coin mints to convoy records, fasteners to dockyard habits. Independent claims collided with official timelines because each side protected its interests. A state holds details back until law and science are ready. A salver goes public to secure credit. Under the surface of the headlines, the real work is slow comparison. The multi-billion-dollar fight can be mapped without heat. The coastal state asserts cultural patrimony, maritime zone jurisdiction, and stewardship of a grave. The flag state, if different, invokes sovereign immunity that does not evaporate with time. Private discoverers seek reward, arguing no one would be here without our lead. Heirs of insurers, where records exist, trace paid claims and say, our predecessors paid for loss, rights follow payment. Arbitrations and courts weigh these strands with rules honed across decades. Sovereign immune warships are not ordinary cargo carriers. Cultural heritage is not a showroom. Salvage law rewards rescue, not ransack. Lately, the scale tilts toward heritage and immunity over treasure markets. Law at the bottom of the sea depends on place and status. Inside a nation's maritime zone, domestic heritage law has teeth. Permits define what science may do and what commerce may not. On the high seas, sovereign warships still carry their flag's protection, even in silence and silt. The finders versus owners story whispers a simple lesson. Discovery is not title. In this realm, responsible states respect each other's dead and their ships, and responsible projects publish methods, not just results. Secrecy protocols earn a patient defense. Publishing a GPS pin is an invitation to theft disguised as adventure. Copycat dives cut into concretions, scatter coins like gravel, and erase the order in which time laid them down. Sediment layers are pages in a book. A single thoughtless shovel tears them out and throws them to the wind. Scientists need quiet to map and model before public excitement adds pressure. After that work is secured, images and data belong to everyone. Until then, the site deserves shade. Science makes the dark legible. Multi-beam sonar sweeps the seafloor and returns a 3D landscape where hulls, anchors, and debris fields rise from plane to relief. Sub-bottom profiling speaks softly about what lies under sediment. ROVs descend with lights and lenses, hovering where hands would break, circling where feet would stumble. Photogrammetry turns thousands of overlapping photographs into an accurate 3D twin, a model so precise that measurements can be taken from a desk. High-resolution stills freeze details, a foundry stamp on a gun, a mint mark on a coin, a mortise in a timber. Each instrument fails in some way and succeeds in another. Together they triangulate truth. A Spanish galleon wears a style sheet written in iron, wood, and bronze. Guns show national origin and era in their cascabels and trunnions. Foundry symbols act like signatures. Anchors carry national accents in their flukes and palms. Ballast stones settle where the hull's belly used to be. Cargo metal fuses into rough sculptures called concretions, which hide coins and hardware in mineral cocoons. To an untrained eye, the site looks like a pile of stones and pipes. To a practiced one, it's a library. A single coin in place, half hidden, says more than a polished pile on a velvet cloth, because place is meaning. Archaeology and treasure hunting aim at different horizons. Archaeology values context. Treasure hunting values objects. In context, small things talk. A button near a hatch marks a path. A ceramic shard in a mess area hints at a meal. A stack of shot beside a gun carriage whispers of battle rhythm. Archaeologists lay grids, form questions, and sample in ways that leave most of the site untouched this year, so that next year, with better tools, more can be learned. Treasure routines flip that script, pulling big pieces fast for spectacle. Quick fact: each dramatic grab can erase answers that would have taught for a century. Conservation is the quiet backbone of any honest recovery. Salt saturates metal and wood if exposed and left alone. Iron blooms and crumbles. Wood warps and cracks and coins split. Conservators soak, rinse, monitor, adjust, and repeat weeks into months, months into years. Electrolysis hums under tanks where iron surrenders chlorides. Polyethylene glycol creeps into wood and replaces water cell by cell before freeze-drying locks shape in place. Ceramics are cleaned under magnifiers, so residues that reveal contents, wine, oil, medicine are not washed away. Labor, chemicals, power, space, and time are not side notes. They are the price of truth. Budgets for care often exceed fantasy valuations for sale, and that is a feature, not a flaw. A lawful recovery would look like choreography, not conquest. First, documentation, full-site photogrammetry, catalog numbers tied to precise coordinates, and video lines that create a permanent record. Then, selective lift, items chosen to answer research questions, to protect delicate materials, or to represent the site's narrative. Cradle systems would lift whole blocks, sediment plus artifact, so that disassembly happens in a lab where a crumb is a clue. Chains of custody would read like a ledger. Public display plans would begin with stories, not with shine. Miners in cold mountains, mint workers at hot hearths, sailors in narrow hammocks, gunners under smoke, merchants at desks, families at windows. Two promises follow the cameras from press conference to classroom. The investor's promise is money, billions on the bottom, charts trending upward, and an exit that turns salt into cash. The historian's promise is meaning, a shared past told well, school visits and digital twins, scholarship and pride, and a story that belongs to everyone. Governments stand between, translating hope into policy. They can choose budgets that fund labs and displays, and rules that keep artifacts off auction blocks. The projects that last are the ones that return value to citizens as knowledge and identity, not as unsourced souvenirs. Money talk continues with practical lines. Funding can come from public budgets, heritage grants, and philanthropies that like patient outcomes. Public-private partnerships can provide ships, ROVs, or lab tech in exchange for credit and data, not ownership. Tourism rises when museums tell strong stories and cities build gentle infrastructure, walkable routes, trained guides, open archives. Treasure towns that avoid becoming trinket markets anchor their identity in education. Laws against selling artifacts are not obstacles to pride. They are the guardrails that keep pride from becoming theft. Courts elsewhere have already weighed pieces of this puzzle. Where warships lie under flags, judges have upheld sovereign immunity and rejected simple salvage claims. Where private companies shouted first, courts asked for proof that convinced scientists, not only investors. Where states guarded coordinates, benches respected secrecy when risk was clear. Precedents are lighthouses, good to steer by, dangerous to crash into. Every case demands its own chart. Artifacts read like paragraphs when approached with respect. Cannons carry maker's marks and weights that match tables in old foundry records. Coin clusters carry latest date coins that set no earlier than lines. Cargo fasteners are tiny signatures, nail heads, hinge widths, mortise shapes that map supply chains. Tools, pipes, beads, rosaries, and buckles make a ship human. A good exhibit will place gold between iron and wood, not above them. It will place names beside numbers and routes beside coins. Engineering reminds viewers that the sea does not forgive rough handling. Concretions protect fragile stacks of coins and fittings. Lifting a block by its crust can crush the pages inside. ROVs drift in currents that tug umbilicals like impatient pets. Winches groan under consistent load or fail suddenly. If seas slam, weather windows set the pace. A month that ends with maps and no artifacts is not failure. It is discipline. The deep rewards caution and punishes hurry. Ethics ask a community question. Who tells the story? National voices matter. So do descendant communities, whose labor and lives fed the machine that the Galleon served. The story of wealth without the story of work is a mirror that flatters, not a window that teaches. Classrooms deserve narratives that honor skill, risk, and sorrow without stoking gold fever. Transparency, publishing logbooks, dive hours, conservation updates, turns citizens into shareholders of memory. People are patient with projects that speak clearly. Media myths and number games sneak in with every new headline. Totals grow when writers stir registered cargo, contraband guesses, and emerald legends into one pot. A viewer can test any claim in 4 steps. What documents are cited? What tools were used? Where is the site legally? How will conservation be paid for? Claims that answer each plainly earn attention. Claims that dodge are noise dressed as news. Cartagena. Then ramparts thick, markets busy, families watching sails pass the harbor mouth with pride and anxiety. Cartagena. Now. Music in plazas, museums that hold cool rooms for hot stories, and a chance to turn one wreck into a wider window on the Atlantic world. A memorial that lists names, trades, and places of origin will last longer than a replica chest under lights. Visitors protect what they can imagine. Good curation sparks imagination responsibly. If anything surfaces, diplomacy follows method. Ownership is confirmed. Custody is assigned. Loan programs. Let artifacts travel under agreements that keep title clear. Insurance and security are frameworks, not only guards. Documentation that makes theft foolish. Sensors that make tampering risky. Familiarity that makes objects hard to fence. The best protection is public knowledge. A famous artifact is a terrible thing to steal. Audience prompts invite careful thought instead of heat. Early on, sovereign worship or salvage reward. Who should have the final say and why? Midway, if one object leads the exhibit, should it be a cannon for grandeur, a coin hoard for sparkle, or a personal item for humanity? Near the end, what matters more? The cash value or the full story? The site can tell. None of these questions are traps. They are steering wheels the audience can hold. Myth and reality sit for a final audit before this story anchors. Documents confirm the convoy and the loss. Records make registered value enormous for its day. Reason allows unregistered value to have raised the total. Precision about modern totals is impossible and should not be faked. The site's identity rests on converging lines of evidence, not a single showpiece. Law in this century leans toward protection. Technology reveals without ruin when used by patient hands. The work ahead is steady and public. Picture a laboratory where a coin soaks under an almost silent hum. Chloride maps appear and fade as baths are changed. A conservator notes a mint mark that ties metal to a mountain, a furnace, a die, a hand. Picture a classroom where a 3D model of the wreck turns under a student's finger. The camera stops at a cannon's vent. A teacher asks how heat moved through powder and iron. Picture a gallery where one emerald shares a case with a miner's hammer, and a map of trade winds held together by a label that tells how labor and weather shaped luck. Picture a harbor balcony where an older visitor reads a list of names and finds one that sounds like a relative, whether or not it is. In those rooms and on that balcony, treasure thins into story, and story thickens into meaning. The recap returns like a tide that knows the shore. The San Jose captivates because immense wealth, hard science, and hard law intersect in one narrative that stretches from a battle to a lab, from a courtroom to a classroom. The battle explains the silence on the sea. The paperwork preserves the voice. The technology draws a portrait in sound and light. The law assigns duties. The conservation turns objects into teachers. Money frames decisions. Ethics aim them. If this wreck rises, even in part, the world will measure success not only by what gleams on opening day, but by what remains to learn 10 years later. Gold can be counted, meaning must be curated. Heads up on this closing truth, stated without rush. The sea keeps the score. It remembers what people drop into it, and returns only what people are ready to raise carefully. Nations that choose patience over spectacle and understanding over sale win something larger than coins. They win a shared inheritance that does not spend down. To round out the picture with clarity and calm, the account widens from ship, law, and laboratory to the wider world that fed the San Jose and the rules that still circle it. The convoy was not a miracle. It was a machine, and machines have parts. Mines in the Andes supplied the ore. Mints pressed metal into money. Merchants arranged cargoes in ledgers that smelled of ink and wax. Officials counted everything that could be counted, knowing what could not would still find its way into holds. The sea linked it all, and the galleon was the hinge on which the door swung. The silver most often named in these stories began as ore lifted from cold mountains by men whose breath showed in the air. It rode llamas down to crushing mills where stone wheels rolled in patient circles. Mercury from faraway flames mixed with crushed rock to pull silver free. The amalgam shone dully in daylight, then brightened in furnaces where heat did the last work. Bars were cast and stamped with marks that said where, and sometimes when, those marks still speak centuries later, not to value alone but to rotes, laws, and people. Gold, worked at warmer altitudes and different mines, traveled its own chain, sometimes in bars, sometimes in coins, sometimes in small pieces meant for personal use that later entered hoards by chance or by fear. Emeralds from mountain veins, bright stones pried out of dark rock, entered the stream in fits and starts. Some legal, some private. A register could not catch all of it. It caught enough that historians can build a skeleton on which the muscle of rumor hangs. The mints turned metal into measures the world trusted. Dies struck coins into shape. Cobs with irregular edges that still weighed what they promised, and later milled coins with clean rims that sang against tables. Mint marks and assayers' initials were not decoration. They were accountability. A single coin's mark can place its birth in a city and a year range. When such coins appear together under a collapsed deck, they do not only glitter, they testify. Even a child in a museum, shown the letter on a coin and the city that letter means, can feel how a small symbol shrinks the world enough to understand it. The convoy system did not move only metal. It carried the tools and textiles that made colonial cities breathe, the wine that made tables friendlier, the paper that made offices hum, and the medicines that made sickness a little less frightening. Manifests, the tidy lists that give archivists delight, enumerated these things in columns and notes. A person reading one today can hear the economy talk. So many bolts of cloth, so many jars of oil, so many casks of wine, so many reams of paper. What manifests miss are the small packets sewn into jackets, the extra coins wrapped in cloth, the stones traded not with a stamp, but with a handshake. Those missings are the holes through which legend blows. A careful narrator keeps the list neat and leaves the wind to the poets. On deck, life followed a rhythm older than the ship itself. The bell marked watches. Men took turns at the helm, at the braces, at the pumps. The cook's fire, guarded against sparks, turned water and grain into meals that were more comfort than cuisine. Hammocks swung. Prayers rose at dawn and dusk, under skies that changed from steel to velvet. A warship's grace was order, everything in its place, everyone at their station. It was that order that made the short, violent hour off Cartagena so stark. When a ship built for routine and for risk meets an enemy well handled, fortune decides which checklist finishes and which bursts. The enemy squadron in 1708, an adversary patrolling a coast for exactly this kind of prize, did not need to win a debate, it needed to win a moment. The record shows a moment arrived, whether the ship's magazine ignited by spark or shot, whether the hull breach was fatal by design or by luck, the effect was the same. A heavy craft full of stories dropped into silence, survivors' words, collected quickly in the language of the day, share images that a modern ear can still hold. A rush, a crack, a backward tilt, a sudden dark. These are not only dramatic, they are evidence of sequence and force. They say how quickly things can change at sea. Back on land, paperwork took over. Where waves had finished, port officials wrote reports. Couriers carried letters along roads where dust rose. Ledgers crossed desks. In that dust and on those desks, a new fate for the San Jose was sealed. It would be discussed longer than it sailed. Records would be copied. Maps would be annotated. In time, governments would keep parts of those papers in rooms cool enough to protect ink and brittle pages. The fact that the ship can be discussed today with any confidence owes everything to that long, dull work. It is why the word Grail in this story is a scholar's compliment as much as a dreamer's delight. Centuries later, deep-sea maps lit screens in rooms that smell not of salt, but of electronics. Multi-beam images showed humps and hollows that became gun lines and timbers once a human mind and an expert's habit went to work on them. Photogrammetry stitched thousands of overlapping high-resolution stills into models that can be turned by a fingertip on a tablet as easily as a globe is turned on a school desk. It is a kind of magic that insists on math first. The deeper lesson for a broad audience is simple and satisfying. The best modern technology exists to slow people down, not to speed them up, to let them see before they touch, to let them measure before they move. In that measured spirit, instruments and eyes returned again and again to the same questions. How many guns? Do their cascabeles and trunnions match a pattern? Are any foundry marks visible? What ballast remains? And where did it settle? Are there coin concretions? And if so, do edge shapes or partial marks tell origin and date windows? Is there timber joinery that points to a particular dockyard habit? Scarfs at certain angles? Tree nails of particular size? The more of these answers align, the more a name can be spoken without blush. A patient project waits for alignment. Impatient projects speak first and undo later. The undoing hurts the field and the audience's trust. Trust sits at the center of the legal fight, as firmly as it sits at the center of museum work. When a state says warship, it invokes a legal category that protects more than property. It protects graves. When a private party says discovery, it invokes centuries of law that reward effort but never endorse theft. When a judge says heritage, the word carries obligations to living people who own the past by citizenship, to dead people who deserve rest and respect, and to future people who deserve to learn. The best choices in these cases feel less like victories and more like steady hands on a wheel in bad weather. A short, clear detour into maritime zones keeps the map crisp for listeners. A coastal state's territorial sea extends a set distance from its shore. A contiguous zone beyond that allows certain protective actions. An exclusive economic zone, EEZ, reaches farther for resource rights. Heritage laws usually draw circles on these waters with obligations attached. A site inside these lines is not simply a spot on a global ocean. It is a place under rules that match a nation's values. Outside these lines, customary law and treaties still shield sovereign warships from being treated as wrecking yards. In both spaces, the trend of the last half-century has tilted towards science and memory over extraction and auction. Because so many listeners imagine treasure as coins and stones alone, the narration spends time with the ordinary objects that bring a ship to life. A carpenter's adze with a handle worn by a right-handed grip tells more about daily work than a chest of coins tells about counting. A pewter spoon beside a broken ceramic bowl and a fish spine says more about dinner than a manifest entry for wine. A rosary tangled around a nail, found in a corner where someone may have kept personal things, speaks quietly about fear and comfort. A pipe stem, snapped neatly at a habitual length, tells a small joke about sailors that delight school children and sometimes their grandparents. In a good gallery, these are the pieces that slow people down and make them nod. Emeralds, the objects that most easily jump into headlines, take a gentler shape under this light. If they appear, they carry stories about mountains and miners, about traders and weighing scales, and about how luxury rode alongside necessity in holds meant first for coin and bar. Emeralds also attract thieves faster than most objects do, which is why secrecy about exact sites makes ethical and practical sense. A stone in a museum case can be explained and protected. A stone in a palm moves too quickly for stories to keep up. Insurance threads through this whole fabric more quietly than coins do. In the early 18th century, merchants and states learned to spread risk with paper and promise. Policies written in rooms far from the sea absorbed some of the shock when ships went down. The idea that heirs of companies that once paid could now speak in court about a wreck's remains, shows how long paperwork lasts. Their claims, when they come, face modern frameworks that prioritize the identity of a ship as a warship and a site as heritage. The old promises are read respectively, the new priorities are applied firmly. Because this channel's audience loves the pirate world. The narration honors that interest, without bending facts. Privateers and pirates thrived when states and empires sent wealth past headlands, where fast ships could lurk. The same oceans that carried the San Jose carried men who sailed under letters of marque, legal permission to prey on enemies, and men who sailed under nothing but ambition. Their presence in these waters explains why convoys existed, why escorts mattered, and why battles burst. Yet the San Jose story is not a pirate's hunt for loot. It is a nation's loss, and a world's long argument about how to behave when losses are found again. That distinction keeps romance in its proper frame. Secrecy returns for a practical reminder about the pace of damage. A single group arriving at night with cutting tools and no respect can ruin 5 years of planning. Sediments that took centuries to settle get stirred up in seconds. Strata that recorded the order of collapse are mixed like cake batter. The next day, even the best ROV images cannot turn that batter back into layers. The choice to keep coordinates under wraps is not a tease. It is a duty. Technology's limits deserve honest mention, along with its strengths. Sonar can be confused by geology. Sub-bottom instruments struggle in certain sediments. Photogrammetry requires still water that the sea does not always provide. ROVs, however advanced, still crawl rather than sprint. The romance of flicking a switch and seeing a ship appear gives way to the reality of waiting for currents to calm, fighting with a reflection in the camera dome, and reviewing thousands of images to edit out blur, glare, and particles in the water column. A viewer who understands these limits becomes a better judge of future press releases. Conservation, too, has limits that make sense once heard. Some wood cannot be saved. Some iron gives up too much salt and becomes fragile shells. Some ceramics crumble after centuries in aggressive chemistry. The work is not about defeating time. It is about negotiating with it. In negotiations, the best outcome sometimes looks modest. A shapeless lump becomes legible enough to identify. A fragment holds still long enough to be scanned and printed for study. A handful of coins yields their mint marks, and then returns to a tank for more care. Modesty is not failure. It is realism. Realism guards museums from promising more than they can deliver. A responsible museum labels uncertainty as uncertainty and estimates as estimates. It chooses clarity over drama. In wall text, it groups objects thematically to teach, not to impress, and it places mirrors carefully so that visitors see themselves among sailors and shopkeepers, miners and mint workers, not above them. It invites questions. How did this get here? Who touched it? What did they think? How are we sure? The museum that teaches visitors to ask those questions once will have visitors for life. On the sea floor, ethics and engineering meet in the design of lifts. A block lift method, taking object and sediment together in a foam-lined box, saves relationships. In a lab, a controlled dig under bright lights and magnification then reveals item by item the order in which time stacked them. It is the opposite of a deck-side reveal, where a chest is cracked and cameras flash. The block looks dull on day one, and then, like a careful novel, starts making sense chapter by chapter. It is in those chapters that students fall in love with work they never knew existed. Students also fall in love with maps. The story returns to charts, because charts train the eyes that found the wreck and train the hands that will explain it. A child shown how soundings made sea mountains into lines, and how those lines became safe routes marked on paper, understands how a pilot thought in 1708 and how an ROA pilot thinks today. In a classroom where a simple compass and an old-style divider sit next to a tablet running a 3D model, centuries shrink to the span of an arm. That is more beautiful than a headline, because numbers will always chase this wreck. The account gives a gentle, robust way to handle them. Range thinking beats point guessing. A registered cargo number sits at one end. A plausible addition for private shipping widens the band. A modern price for silver, a different price for gold, and another for emeralds create three rollers that move. Conservation and legal costs subtract from fantasy totals in large bites. The remainder is not a present waiting under a tree. It is a budget for public work. People who can hold all of this at once, value, cost, law, science, become the kind of citizens heritage projects need. Citizenship appears again when the story turns to who benefits. A national project that treats a wreck as shared inheritance spreads gains widely. Museum workers find stable employment. Universities develop courses and laboratories that train the next generation. Guides and writers find steady audiences. Digital archives, open to anyone with a connection, turn the old habit of locking knowledge in rooms into a new habit of releasing it with context. A grandparent helping a child zoom into a model on a couch is as much a beneficiary as a traveler buying a ticket at a gallery door. The harbor city at the center of this tale, with its walls and streets, carries the weight of memory gracefully when given good words. A ceremony that reads names aloud at dawn sets the tone. A plaque that lists not a number, but a roster of trades dignifies the ordinary. Exhibits that place a spoon near a cannon and a ledger near a chest keep the balance. Festivals that remember the convoy calendars with music and lectures make learning feel like life, not like punishment. The best legacy for a loss is understanding. The second best is kindness. Kindness reaches even into disagreements. People who want quick, shining results often love the sea as much as people who argue for slow, careful work. They picture a child's eyes brightening at a glass case and mistake that brightness for proof that speed is good. A narrator can help both sides by explaining that the same child's eyes will brighten again and for longer when the case sits in a room that tells the whole story with respect. Good narration does not scold, it invites both temperaments to work together. Quotes, used sparingly and clearly attributed, bring these abstractions into human tone without inviting argument. A conservator in a lab might say, "Salt is patient. We must be more patient." A ranger might say, "The coordinates are not a secret. They are a promise to the future." A historian might say, "Gold is heavy, but context weighs more." A teacher might say, "The day a student sees their town on a map beside a coin's mint mark is the day a life changes." These are not slogans. They are small truths that people who do the work say when cameras are off. The law returns for a closing review of the courtroom road ahead. If a case comes before judges, briefs will cite centuries of practice, recent treaties, and the particular facts of depth, distance, and identity. Expert witnesses will explain foundry marks and coin dating with slides that are all labels and no glitter. Lawyers will argue about the meaning of warship in an era when flags change and nations evolve. The bench will consider not just title in the narrow sense but duties in the broad one. Duties to graves, to citizens, and to the global commons of knowledge. The best opinion will read like a good map, clear, scaled, and honest about shoals. Honesty about shoals extends to the final myth versus reality pass that a long dingenry owes its audience. It is a myth that a wreck like this is a chest waiting to be pried in a rush. Reality is a sight waiting to be read slowly. It is a myth that secrecy is greedy. Reality is that secrecy protects the things everyone wants to see later. It is a myth that selling pieces honors history by putting it in circulation. Reality is that sale erases relationships and creates silence. It is a myth that technology solves every problem. Reality is that technology poses questions that only patience can answer. Patience, then, becomes the true main character of this story. Patience built the convoy system. It took months to align ships and cargo. Patience wrote the documents that survived. Clerks did not know they were saving a future. Patience drove the instruments across the bottom. Engineers did not pretend the ocean owed them speed. Patience fills tanks in labs. Chemists do not argue with chlorides. Patience writes labels that do not lie. Patience most of all lets nations turn past violence into present learning, without repeating the moral error of treating a grave as a storehouse. There is room, even here, for a last invitation to curiosity. If one artifact could stand at the entrance to the first exhibit chosen not for shine but for lesson, which would it be? A cannon shows craft and conflict. A coin hoard shows systems of value. A shoe buckle shows a person. Each choice says something about the values of the people who chose it. The narrator trusts the audience to pick wisely in their minds and to enjoy arguing kindly with friends about what wisely mean. And there is room for one more quiet test that viewers can apply to future news. When a new claim about the San Jose appears, a person can ask, what archive does it cite? What instrument captured this image? Where, legally, does this coordinate sit? And what plan is in place to conserve what is lifted? If the answers are clear and calm, the claim deserves attention. If the answers are fog and urgency, the claim deserves a raised eyebrow and a weight. In the end, the long curve of this narrative bends back to a harbor. At sunset, the water, which once closed quickly over panic and fire, lies flat now. A bell rings somewhere, perhaps from a church, perhaps from a ship. On a bench, a parent tells a child that a ship with a beautiful name lies out there and that grown-ups have promised to treat it well. The child asks if the gold will be seen. The parent says, some of it, maybe someday, but you will certainly see the stories. The child seems content with that, which is a small miracle and a large instruction to adults. The final recap arrives without rush. The San Jose Galleon remains the object of enormous attention because wealth, science and law meet at its coordinates. The battle explains the loss. The records fix the memory. The instruments reveal the shape. The courts guard the meaning. The laboratories rescue the voices of objects. The museums share them. The city holds them. The world learns. Cash value can guide budgets, but must not govern behavior. The real measure of success is whether the next generation gets a past that still has depth. The closing line rests where it belongs, steady and spare. The sea keeps the score, and only careful hands and honest minds have the right to turn that score into a song the world can hear.